Hello, Maria Dolores. We are Analía and Carolina, and we're going to explain you the intercultural conflict between university students, especially indigenous and mestizo students. In the universities, the space is shared between indigenous and mestizo students, coming from several cities, as well as some foreigners who come through the academics exchange programs. What we are interested in analyze here are the relationships between indigenous and mestizo students, which take up the intercultural conflict in context of educational institutions. We can ask ourselves, what are the areas in which the intercultural conflicts between indigenous and mestizo students manifest itself? Comparing with different case of studies, we identified the following three areas. The first one is the academic, the second is the compensatory programs, and the third is the interpersonal relationships. Starting with academic, this conflict is generated from the academic advantages and disadvantages of students in relation to their ethnic affiliation and educational trajectory. For example, mestizo students enjoy important academic advantages derived from being a mother who speaks Spanish and having a more consistent school education. So for them it's much easier for the mestizos to carry out the activities and tasks by the teachers, and therefore they obtain higher grades, which in some way causes a feeling of superiority towards indigenous students. All students agree in identifying the poor handling of Spanish as a problem that has caused many difficulties through their school life. The handling of the indigenous language has been a burden for the indigenous students to overcome, since it prevents them from learning Spanish correctly, which has led in many cases to the removal of young people for their community and his family at an early age, with the purpose of learning Spanish and having a better education in a municipal seat. We also compare what happens in the opposite case, in which the academic advantages are in favor of indigenous students. That's especially with the courses of native language. In the case of native language, it is the indigenous university students who enjoy an academic advantages over their mestizos classmates. With the compensatory programs is the second area that we think is a conflict between indigenous and mestizo students, like national scholarship programs. Many of the institutions that offer scholarships require certain requirements that indigenous students do not have, like a guarantor or a large initial amount of money, or letters indicating that the responsible person has the appropriate income to pay the education. This requirement represents a strong limit for mestizo students' families who, despite having slightly higher family incomes than those indicated in the scholarship called living in a city, have much higher expenses than a rural family like indigenous students. Thus, the access to a scholarship becomes a factor that aggravates the intercultural conflicts between the indigenous and mestizo students in our universities, who openly complain that there are only scholarships for mestizos. With the third area we identify is the interpersonal relationships. Here we focus on the integration of groups to carry out research work in the field interpersonal relationships between students. This can be clearly seen by observing the special disposition of students in the classrooms, where it is common to see a separation between indigenous and mestizos. The interpersonal relationship between mestizo and indigenous students are marked by reciprocally discriminatory attitudes.
The cultural components. According to Auber's theory, the culture of conflict and cultural diversity allow us to analyze the implication of law, values, and interests within cultural problems that arise in our society. In this case, our problem revolves around young university students who study in establishments where the majority of people are mestizos. The cultural components that encompass this theme are the pluralism, customs, and traditions of the natives, customs and traditions of the mestizos, as well as the behavior of the dominant group with the indigenous people. The fact of wearing different clothes, speaking differently, and behaving different generates conflicts between the two cultures. Of course, the dominant culture wants to impose its norms and rules. Therefore, the minority culture feels invaded. There may be an alteration and in more serious cases suffer from discrimination. Once these aspects have been described, it is necessary to mention that problems should be avoided and rather focus on the similarities that exist between cultures in order to reach an agreement and mutual respect to achieve genuine coexistence.
So, based on what we analyzed, we think that the solutions are: first, we have to develop intercultural education models that seek to enhance the sociocultural knowledge of indigenous people. Another point that we believe is that it is necessary to implement actions that, beyond fulfilling an analgesic function, such as the positive discrimination measures analyzed in different studies, we have to promote a real participations of the members of indigenous peoples in every area.
Thank you. This is our references. I hope you enjoyed our video.